What if I told you that entire nations have existed only on paper, that some of history's most powerful rulers reigned over lands that never existed, and that thousands of people, including kings, presidents, and even investors, were completely taken in? These weren't just tall tales or elaborate jokes. They were empires, kingdoms, and republics that fooled the world, sometimes with deadly consequences. Welcome to history's strangest hall of mirrors, where borders are imaginary, kings rule from hotel rooms, and the only thing more bizarre than the lies is how many people believed them. Let's start with a simple question. What makes a country real? Is it a flag, a map, an army, or is it just someone convincing enough to say, "This land is mine"? If you think a nation needs land or people, think again. Over the last 3 centuries, a parade of con artists, dreamers, and outright lunatics have created fake empires that tricked governments, robbed investors, and sometimes even changed real history. And the strangest part? Many of these hoaxes still echo today, shaping the way we think about borders, power, and identity. Our first stop is the mist-shrouded Caribbean in the early 19th century, where a Scottish adventurer named Gregor MacGregor pulled off what might be the greatest real estate scam in human history. MacGregor was a decorated soldier and a charming storyteller. In 1820, he arrived in London with a bold claim. He was the cazique, or prince, of a vast Central American land called Payé. He dazzled London society with tales of Payé's gold mines, fertile fields, and bustling harbors. MacGregor sold government bonds and land grants to eager British investors and convinced shiploads of settlers to cross the Atlantic to start new lives in this tropical paradise. But there was one problem. Payé did not exist. The land was a barely inhabited, mosquito-infested corner of the Mosquito Coast, and the capital city was nothing but jungle. When the settlers arrived, disaster struck. Many died of disease, and the survivors barely escaped with their lives. MacGregor, meanwhile, vanished with today's equivalent of millions of dollars. And yet, even after the truth came out, he kept selling Poyasian titles for years. Why did so many people believe him? Maybe because, in an age of colonial expansion, the idea of a new Eden was too good to check. But Payé is just the tip of the iceberg. Fast forward to the 1880s, when a Frenchman named Charles-Marie David de Mairena declared himself King Marie I of the Kingdom of Sedong, deep in the jungles of what's now Vietnam. Sedong was never recognized by any country, but Mairena designed flags, minted coins, and even handed out noble titles to anyone who would listen. He sent letters to European monarchs demanding recognition, and for a brief moment, some people in Paris took him seriously. When the French authorities finally caught up, Mairena fled to the Dutch East Indies, where he died, reportedly after trying to sell his kingdom to the highest bidder. It sounds like a joke, but these fake kingdoms had real consequences. Investors lost fortunes, settlers lost their lives, and the lines on the map, supposedly so solid, turned out to be drawn in sand. But what about fake countries that were never meant to scam anyone? Some were invented as pranks, or even as serious works of art. Take the legendary Kingdom of Redonda. In the late 19th century, a British writer named Matthew Doughty Shield declared himself king of an uninhabited rock in the Caribbean, Redonda, so his son could claim a royal title. Over the next century, the Kingdom of Redonda became a kind of literary joke, with writers and poets bestowing the crown on each other, creating elaborate histories, and even issuing passports. No one was harmed, but the boundaries between fact and fiction got blurry. If you visit Redonda today, you'll find nothing but seabirds and legend. Or consider Sealand, the micronation, founded on a derelict World War II sea fort off the coast of England. In 1967, a retired British Army major named Paddy Roy Bates declared the fort an independent principality, complete with a flag, a national anthem, and, of course, royal titles for sale. At various times, Sealand was invaded, liberated, and even recognized by a German diplomat, who probably just wanted to avoid an international incident. Today, you can still buy a Sealand passport or become a lord for a fee. Is it a country? The British government says no. But for its citizens, the line between joke and reality is thin indeed. Throughout history, the temptation to invent fake countries has been irresistible, sometimes for profit, sometimes for power, sometimes just for fun. But in some cases, the consequences were anything but funny. Let's rewind to the late 19th century, at the height of the scramble for Africa. European powers were carving up the continent, often with little knowledge of what lay inland. Into this chaos stepped a Polish explorer named Ignacy Domeyko, who arrived in Paris in 1883 with a bold claim. He represented the Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia, a gigantic new nation in South America supposedly ruled by a French lawyer named Aurélie Antoine de Tonans. Tonans had journeyed to South America and convinced some indigenous Mapuche leaders to name him king. He designed a flag, wrote a constitution, and even issued coins. For a few years, he played the part, writing letters to European courts and printing official documents. But there was no kingdom, no government, and certainly no recognition. When the Chilean authorities arrested Tonans, the whole scheme unraveled. And yet, the kingdom lived on. Today, there are still claimants to the throne, and you can even apply for citizenship online. Why did so many Europeans believe in Araucania and Patagonia? Maybe because, in an age of empire, no one wanted to admit how little they knew about the world beyond their borders. The 20th century, too, saw its fair share of imaginary nations. In the 1920s, a group of Russian émigrés in Paris declared the existence of the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights Hospitaller. A fake state that issued passports, sold knighthoods, and even tried to claim seats at international conferences. The real Knights of Malta were not amused, but for years, the bogus order fooled everyone from European aristocrats to American millionaires. Even today, dozens of orders claim descent from the Hospitallers, each with its own fake medals and ceremonies. But perhaps the strangest story of all comes from the age of the Internet. In 2005, a group of pranksters created the Republic of Molossia, a country in Nevada with its own time zone, currency, the Valora, and even a history of wars against neighboring micronations. The president, Kevin Baugh, wears a sash and greets visitors at the border. Of course, it's all in good fun. Molossia is a joke, a living museum of micronational absurdity. But it raises a question. If people are willing to believe in fake countries, how do we know the real ones aren't just as fragile? Some fake countries, though, were more than just pranks, they were weapons. During World War II, British intelligence invented an entire fake resistance movement in occupied France, complete with code names, forged documents, and phantom radio broadcasts. The goal? To trick the Germans into wasting resources hunting for enemies who didn't exist. The ruse worked so well that the Nazis devoted entire units to chasing shadows. In this case, the country wasn't a scam or a joke. It was a tool of war, proof that sometimes a lie can save lives. But why are we so easily fooled by fake empires? Maybe it's because we want to believe in heroes, in adventure, in the possibility of something more. Or maybe it's because borders themselves are such strange inventions, lines on a map that can change overnight, often for reasons no one really understands. Take the example of the Principality of Hutt River in Australia. In 1970, Leonard Castley, a disgruntled wheat farmer, declared his land independent from Australia after a dispute over grain quotas. He styled himself Prince Leonard, issued his own currency, and even declared war on Australia, by sending a letter to the Governor-General. For decades, Hutt River existed in a legal gray zone. Tourists visited, stamps were sold, and Castley ruled his principality with a mix of humor and stubbornness. In 2020, the adventure finally ended, but for 50 years, Hutt River lived as a real-life loophole in the law. A reminder that sometimes, history is stranger than fiction. Or consider the Free Republic of Liberland, founded by a Czech politician in 2015 on a disputed patch of land between Croatia and Serbia. Liberland has a flag, a constitution, and even a government in exile. Thousands of people have applied for citizenship, and the founders lobby the United Nations for recognition. Is it a country? Not according to anyone with an atlas. But in a world obsessed with borders, Liberland is a living challenge to our ideas of what nations really are. Of course, not all hoaxes are harmless. In the mid-19th century, an American entrepreneur named George Salmanazar convinced the British public that he was a native of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, complete with a made-up language, customs, and stories of cannibalism. Salmanazar lectured at universities, wrote a best-selling memoir, and even advised the British government on Formosan affairs. But the entire story was an invention, Salmanazar was a Frenchman, his language was gibberish, and his country was a fantasy. The hoax collapsed, but not before it shaped British attitudes toward Asia for decades. So how do these fake empires keep fooling people, generation after generation? Maybe it's because power often rests on belief. If enough people buy the story, if they wave the flag, buy the bonds, or swear allegiance, then the imaginary becomes real, at least for a while. And sometimes, the fake outlasts the fact. Let's return for a moment to Gregor MacGregor and Payet. Even after the scam was exposed, people kept buying Poyasian land grants. Maps continued to show Payet as a real place for years. And MacGregor himself, far from being punished, eventually retired as a respected elder in Venezuela. The lesson? In the theater of history, sometimes the best performance wins the crown. Or look at Aurélie Antoine de Tonans and the Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia. More than a century after his death, there are still claimants to the throne, and orders of chivalry continue to award medals in his name. The kingdom may have been a fantasy, but its legacy endures, a parallel history running alongside the official record. And then there are the micronations, dozens of them, from the Grand Duchy of Westarctica in Antarctica to the Arakan Empire, which claims land on Earth, Mars, and even imaginary planets. Most are jokes, but they remind us how thin the line can be between the real and the pretend. But perhaps the greatest hoax of all is the idea that history is set in stone, that the past is a tidy story told by reliable narrators. The truth is, history is full of imposters, forgeries, and make-believe. Sometimes, the borders on the map are more fiction than fact. And sometimes, the people who draw those borders are the biggest tricksters of all. So the next time you look at a map, remember, every line tells a story, but not every story is true. The world is full of invisible kingdoms, paper empires, and vanished nations that never were. Some were born from greed, some from hope, and some from sheer mischief. But all of them remind us that history isn't just about what happened, it's about what people believed. And sometimes, the belief was enough to make the impossible real. If you enjoyed this journey through history's greatest hoaxes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us here at History Owl. Every week, we uncover the forgotten stories, strange secrets, and unbelievable tales that shaped our world, real or imagined. What other weird corners of history do you want us to explore? Let us know in the comments, and keep your eyes open, because in history, nothing is ever quite as it seems.